The first tremor started in my hands, a faint, almost imperceptible vibration that I recognized with a sickening lurch of my stomach as the unwelcome overture to a much larger, uglier symphony of panic. Bodhi, my 4-year-old golden retriever, my steadfast anchor in the swirling, treacherous currents of anxiety that often threatened to pull me under entirely, lifted his noble head from where he lay placidly, almost regally at my feet beside the weathered park bench. His warm, intelligent brown eyes, pools of unconditional understanding and unwavering loyalty met mine. He nudged his soft, velvety muzzle gently, insistently into my trembling palm, a silent offering of comfort that I desperately, gratefully grasped as if it were a lifeline. We were in the community rose garden, a small, meticulously cultivated splash of vibrant, fragrant beauty nestled within the sprawling and often rigidly, almost obsessively controlled confines of the Willow Creek Condominium Association. It was supposed to be my sanctuary, a tranquil haven where the heady perfume of blooming roses, peace, Mr. Lincoln, Queen Elizabeth, and the quiet, industrious hum of bumblebees could soothe the frayed, jangled edges of my nerves after long, demanding, often contentious weeks at the office. An office where phrases like amicus brief, statutory interpretation, and preliminary injunction were my daily bread. He shouldn't be in here, you know. It's clearly against the spirit of the rules. The voice was sharp, high-pitched, and laced with the unmistakable acidic tang of perpetual disapproval. It sliced through the fragile, tentative peace I'd managed to weave around myself like a protective cloak. I knew that voice, knew it with a dread that settled like a cold stone in my gut. Ms. Evelyn Hayes, self-appointed guardian of Willow Creek's innumerable, often contradictory bylaws, a woman whose pursed, bloodless lips and narrowed, judgmental gaze could, I was convinced, curdle milk at 20 paces. She stood a few feet away, arms crossed tightly over her thin, bird-like chest, her frail frame ramrod straight, her silver hair sprayed into an unyielding, almost architectural helmet of immobility. Her eyes, however, were anything but immobile. They were fixed on Bodhi with an expression of intense, almost visceral distaste, as if he were personally responsible for every aphid black spot and instance of powdery mildew that had ever dared to befall a rosebush within a 5-mile radius. I took a slow, deliberate breath, trying to channel Bodhi's preternatural zen-like calm, a skill I was still trying to master despite years of therapy. "Good morning, Ms. Hayes." I managed my voice a little shakier, a little thinner than I would have liked. "Bodhi is a certified therapy animal, as you know. He's leashed as required, and he's impeccably behaved. We're just enjoying the fresh air and the lovely blooms." Bodhi, as if on cue, as if he understood the undercurrent of tension, let out a soft, contented sigh and rested his head back on his paws. The very picture of canine decorum and benign indifference. Therapy, animal or not. She sniffed her gaze, sweeping disdainfully from Bodhi's tranquil form to me, lingering for a moment on my slightly less than perfectly pressed linen trousers. This is a garden, a showpiece, for residents to enjoy, visually, not for animals to trample and soil and generally lower the tone. "He hasn't trampled or soiled anything, Ms. Hayes," I stated, concentrating on keeping my tone even neutral, despite the familiar tightening in my chest. "He's lying quietly by my side, as you can see. There are no specific rules in the Willow Creek Covenant's conditions or restrictions prohibiting leashed, well-behaved therapy animals from being present in the common garden areas, as long as they are not disruptive, and their owners clean up after them meticulously, which I always, without exception, do." I knew the bylaws intimately. I'd read them cover to cover, highlighted relevant sections, even cross-referenced them with state and federal housing regulations when I first moved in, precisely to avoid these kinds of stressful, unnecessary confrontations. My job, though she had no earthly inkling of it, involved an encyclopedic, almost obsessive understanding of regulations, legal frameworks, and compliance issues, albeit on a much grander national scale. A file labeled Fair Housing Act, Emotional Support Animal Jurisprudence, sat prominently on my desk at work. "There's a spirit of the rules, young woman." Ms. Hayes retorted, her voice rising slightly in pitch, becoming more strident. "A common understanding among civilized people, and the spirit, the clear intent, is that these delicate, expensive horticultural displays are not for dogs. Some people are allergic, you know, severely. Some people are frightened of dogs regardless of your so-called certifications. She made sarcastic air quotes around the word certifications, as if it were a dubious, vaguely fraudulent concept at best. The tremor in my hands intensified. My chest tightened further, a familiar vice-like grip. This was exactly the kind of unsolicited judgmental confrontation my therapist, Dr. Ramirez, had been helping me work through for years, the kind that could, if I wasn't careful, send my carefully managed anxiety spiraling into a full-blown panic attack. Bodhi is extensively trained Ms. Hayes by certified professionals to be calm and unobtrusive in all public spaces. I explained, trying to project an aura of confident assurance I was far from feeling. He's here to help me enjoy the garden. That's his designated therapeutic purpose. Your purpose and his shouldn't infringe upon the comfort, the peace of mind of other residents. She snapped her eyes, narrowing into slits. I, for one, do not feel comfortable, not in the least, with such a large, unpredictable animal so close to the prize-winning peace roses, or the particularly fragile Madame Hardy specimens. She gestured vaguely, with a proprietary air, towards a bush laden with pale yellow blooms, as if Bodhi were seconds away from launching a vicious, unprovoked, and devastating attack on them. This was the inciting spark, the small, unpleasant, entirely predictable friction that I sensed with a sickening lurch in my stomach was about to escalate into something much larger, much uglier. My daily life was a carefully, almost obsessively constructed routine designed to manage the chronic, often debilitating anxiety that had shadowed me since a traumatic, life-altering incident years ago. An incident that had left me emotionally scarred and perpetually on edge. Bodhi was central, absolutely integral to that routine, a calm, steady, unwavering presence in a world that often felt chaotic and threatening. My work as a senior litigator, specializing in animal welfare law, was demanding, often adversarial, but it was a structured, predictable conflict, one where rules of evidence, legal precedent, and professional courtesy usually governed interactions. This petty, personal, irrational attack, cloaked in the guise of community rules and feigned concern for rose bushes, felt different, more insidious, more dangerous to my fragile equilibrium. Over the next few weeks, Ms. Evelyn Hayes seemed to make it her personal, almost fanatical mission to document Bodhi's alleged, entirely fabricated transgressions. I'd see her peering from her lace-curtained apartment window when I took Bodhi for his early morning and late evening walks, her phone camera sometimes visible a glint of light reflecting off its lens. Once she accosted me in the narrow confines of the elevator, her voice sharp with accusation, complaining loudly that she'd seen Bodhi sniff a decorative lamppost on the common grounds for an inappropriately prolonged and frankly disgusting period of time. The condominium manager, a harassed-looking, perpetually stressed man named Mr. Davies, started calling me with polite but increasingly firm reminders about pet etiquette, his tone clearly indicating he was being pressured by Ms. Hayes. "We've received another complaint, Ms. Sharma." He'd begin, his voice tinged with apology and weariness, about Bodhi being well present in the West Lawn area near the gazebo. Apparently his sheer size made a resident uneasy. "Was he off-leash, Mr. Davies?" I'd ask, trying to keep the exasperation from my voice, my patience wearing dangerously thin. "Was he barking incessantly? Did he fail to allow me to pick up after him immediately and dispose of it properly?" No, Ms. Sharma, none of that, according to the report. Just his presence. His dogness, I suppose." The pressure was mounting relentlessly. Each encounter with Ms. Hayes, each passive-aggressive anonymous note slipped under my door, always in her distinctive spidery handwriting, complaining about animal odors or excessive shedding in common areas. Each apologetic phone call from management chipped away at my carefully constructed emotional defenses. The cruel irony was that Bodhi was a paragon of good canine behavior. He never barked unless truly startled by a sudden loud noise. He walked calmly, elegantly on his leash, always by my left side. He was beloved by most of the other residents, especially the children who would shyly, eagerly ask if they could pet him, their faces lighting up when he responded with a gentle lick or a happy tail wag. He was in every conceivable sense a therapeutic presence, not just for me, but I often thought for many others in the building who seemed to find a moment of joy in his quiet, friendly demeanor. One morning, I was on a brief work call in my living room, Bodhi at my feet. The window was open, and Mrs. Henderson, my kind elderly neighbor from downstairs, was tending her small balcony garden. She overheard a snippet of my conversation. Fair Housing Act, reasonable accommodation, emotional support animals have rights, Senator clear precedent. Later that day, she commented, "My dear Anya, you certainly seem to know a lot about the law, especially concerning animals. It's very impressive." I just smiled and said something vague about it being a professional interest. I wasn't ready to share the full extent of my work with my neighbors. My home was my sanctuary, separate from the often brutal realities of my job. The first major escalation, the incident that pushed things beyond petty harassment into something far more serious, occurred on a bright, crisp Saturday morning. I was returning from our usual long walk in the nearby county park Bodhi, trotting happily contentedly by my side. As we approached the main entrance of Willow Creek, Ms. Hayes was exiting, accompanied by two other women I recognized from the notoriously zealous HOA Beautification Committee, both known to be her close confidants and fellow crusaders against perceived community infractions. Ms. Hayes stopped dead in her tracks, her eyes widening theatrically, her hand flying to her chest as if in shock as she spotted Bodhi. "There he is again." She declared, her voice loud, sharp, and carrying clearly across the manicured front lawn, where a few other residents were enjoying the morning sun, reading their papers, or sipping coffee. Constantly underfoot. A menace. I nearly tripped over him yesterday by the mailboxes, you know. He darted right out in front of me. Such a hazard to us elderly residents. This was a blatant, outrageous lie. Bodhi was never underfoot. He was impeccably trained to stay close to my left side, to be aware of his surroundings. "Ms. Hayes, that's simply not true, and you know it," I said, trying to keep my voice calm level, though my heart was starting to pound, a familiar frantic rhythm against my ribs. Several people had turned to look, their expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. "Are you calling me a liar, young woman?" Her voice dripped with manufactured indignation. "In front of these good people, this animal is a menace. He lunged viciously at dear Mrs. Henderson's little Fifi just last week. I saw it with my own two eyes. Poor Fifi was terrified." Mrs. Henderson, the very same kindly elderly woman who adored Bodhi and whose little white poodle Fifi often had playful, mutually enthusiastic, if somewhat yappy on Fifi's part, interactions with him in the designated pet relief area, happened to be one of the residents on the lawn. She looked up from her newspaper, her gentle face clouded with puzzlement. "Evelyn, dear, what on earth are you talking about?" She called out, her voice clear and firm. "Bodhi has always been a perfect gentleman with Fifi. They adore each other. Fifi often instigates the play, you know." Ms. Hayes flushed a dark, unbecoming red, her composure momentarily shaken by this unexpected public contradiction. "Well, perhaps you didn't see it properly, Margaret. My eyesight is still quite keen. I have a very clear recollection. And furthermore," she rallied, her voice regaining its shrill intensity, "he digs in the flower beds. Constantly, I have photographic proof." She fumbled dramatically in her oversized handbag, producing her smartphone with a flourish. This was too much. The public humiliation, the blatant falsehoods, the deliberate, malicious attempt to turn other residents against Bodhi against me. The familiar, suffocating tightness gripped my chest, constricting my breath, making my vision blur at the edges. The sounds around me, Ms. Hayes's strident, accusatory voice, the distant roar of traffic, the cheerful, indifferent chirping of sparrows in the perfectly pruned trees, began to merge, to distort into a discordant, overwhelming cacophony. I could feel the telltale, terrifying signs of a full-blown panic attack, building swift, brutal, and overwhelming. I stumbled back a step, my hand flying to my chest, gasping for air that wouldn't come. "Bodhi!" I managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper. He was instantly alert, pressing his warm, solid body hard against my leg, his presence a tangible anchor in the terrifying, swirling storm of my panic. He looked up at me, his intelligent eyes filled with concern, whining softly, then began to execute the well-practiced, calming protocol we'd rehearsed countless times with his trainer. He nudged my trembling hand repeatedly, insistently, with his wet nose, licked my fingers with his warm, rough tongue, then sat directly in front of me, leaning his full weight against my shins, forcing me to focus on his physical presence, his steady rhythmic breathing, the comforting scent of his fur. Through the deafening haze of my panic, I could still hear Ms. Hayes's voice, sharp, triumphant, and utterly devoid of compassion. "Look at her. Just look at her. She's having some sort of hysterical fit. It's perfectly obvious this woman is unstable, emotionally overwrought, and she has this large, unpredictable animal. It's a clear and present danger to the entire community. The HOA needs to do something drastic before someone gets seriously hurt, before that dog attacks someone." Her words, though, distorted and echoing strangely in my panic-stricken mind, struck me like physical blows. She was using my vulnerability, my diagnosed documented medical condition, as a weapon against me against Bodhi. It was cruel, it was calculated, and it was utterly devastatingly effective in its public humiliation. Other residents were staring now, their faces a mixture of alarm, pity, discomfort, and perhaps, I feared, agreement with Ms. Hayes's assessment. I felt exposed, humiliated, and utterly terrifyingly alone, except for Bodhi. It took every ounce of my strength, every coping mechanism I possessed, aided immeasurably by Bodhi's unwavering grounding support, to regain even a semblance of control, to breathe through the crushing, suffocating weight on my chest, and to make my way shaky, disoriented, and profoundly ashamed, back to the sanctuary of my apartment, the echo of Ms. Hayes's cruel, judgmental pronouncements ringing in my ears. The official registered letter arrived 2 days later, its creamy embossed envelope feeling heavy with dread in my still trembling hands. It was a formal summons to an HOA Executive Committee hearing. Subject line: Review of Pet Compliance and Resident Safety Concern, Canine Bodhi, Resident Anya Sharma, Unit 7B. The letter, cold and impersonal, outlined Ms. Hayes's litany of complaints, alleged aggression towards other animals, and residents' repeated property damage, the photographic proof she had so triumphantly brandished, which I suspected was either deliberately fabricated, cleverly staged, or grossly misrepresented. And now a new, insidious, and deeply alarming claim that my documented, unstable emotional state and my public displays of distress made me an unfit and irresponsible owner of a large animal, thereby rendering Bodhi a potential and significant liability to the Willow Creek community. Ms. Hayes, it turned out, was not just a meddlesome vocal resident. She had recently been elected through a low turnout vote as the new and apparently highly proactive secretary of the HOA board. She now wielded actual power, and she was clearly intent on using it against me. The hearing was scheduled for the following Wednesday evening in the community clubhouse, a sterile, impersonal, soulless room that suddenly felt like a kangaroo courtroom where Bodhi and I were already on trial, presumed guilty. For days, I oscillated between a paralyzing despair and a cold, simmering righteous anger. My first instinct, my anxiety-driven impulse, was to retreat, to hide, to perhaps even consider the drastic step of moving. Anything to escape this relentless, unwarranted persecution. But then I would look at Bodhi, his trusting, innocent eyes, his unwavering, unconditional loyalty, the way he leaned into my touch, and a different, stronger feeling would surface, a steely, unyielding resolve. He had saved me literally and figuratively countless times, pulling me back from the brink of debilitating, life-altering panic. He was not a liability. He was my lifeline, my furry, four-legged guardian angel. And I could not let this ignorant, malicious woman, with her petty vendettas, her gross misinterpretations of community bylaws, and her complete lack of human decency, take him away from me or tarnish his gentle, loving nature. This was no longer just about my personal comfort, my right to live peacefully in my own home, or even Bodhi's right to exist. Ms. Hayes's actions, her clear willingness to falsify information, to exploit my documented medical condition, and to manipulate the HOA process for her own vindictive purposes, represented a gross, dangerous abuse of her minor, recently acquired position of power. And her profound, willful ignorance about the legal standing and robust rights of individuals with certified therapy and assistance animals was not just her personal failing. It reflected a widespread systemic issue, an issue that my entire professional life, my entire career, was dedicated to combating on a national stage. An issue I was uniquely and perhaps providentially equipped to address. The evening of the hearing, I dressed carefully, deliberately, not in my usual comfortable, slightly rumpled weekend attire, but in one of my sharpest work suits, a tailored charcoal gray ensemble that exuded quiet competence and unambiguous authority. I even wore heels. Bodhi, wearing his clearly marked official therapy dog vest, walked calmly with his usual dignity beside me. As we entered the clubhouse, a wave of anxiety washed over me, but I pushed it down, focusing on Bodhi's steady presence. I saw the HOA board members seated at a long, imposing table at the front of the room. Mr. Henderson, the beleaguered president, looking deeply uncomfortable and avoiding my gaze. Two other vaguely familiar faces from the building looking nervous and out of their depth. And Ms. Evelyn Hayes, seated prominently, almost regally, a small, smug, triumphant smirk playing on her thin lips. About a dozen other residents were present, a gallery of curious, expectant onlookers. Ms. Hayes, as board secretary, opened the proceedings, her voice crisp, self-important, and dripping with false objectivity. She laid out her case against Bodhi with a dramatic, almost theatrical flair, repeating her baseless accusations of aggression, property damage, and the supposed danger posed by my well-documented emotional condition. She presented a thick folder labeled Evidence, Bodhi Infractions, with a flourish. This folder, she proclaimed, contained irrefutable proof, blurry out-of-focus photographs of Bodhi near flower beds, none showing him actually in them, or digging a signed, notarized statement from another resident who I later discovered was her close friend, and equally prone to exaggeration and gossip, claiming Bodhi had barked menacingly and without provocation at her cat through a closed window. It was a tissue of lies, distortions, and outright fabrications, but presented with such unwavering righteous conviction that I could see some of the less discerning board members and a few of the onlookers wavering, looking concerned. When she finally dramatically finished her presentation, Mr. Henderson, the HOA president, cleared his throat nervously. Ms. Sharma. He said, his gaze still steadfastly avoiding mine, focusing instead on a point somewhere over my left shoulder. The board, as you can imagine, takes these very serious concerns very seriously indeed. The safety, the security, and the comfort of all our residents is of course paramount. Do you have anything to say in response to these, allegations? I stood up slowly, deliberately, Bodhi rising gracefully, silently with me. I took a moment, allowing the silence in the room to hang heavy-charged, letting all eyes settle on me. Then I spoke, my voice clear, steady, and resonant, utterly devoid of the tremor that had plagued me during our earlier, less formal encounters. This was my arena now. This was my fight. Yes, Mr. Henderson, members of the board, residents of Willow Creek, I do have a great deal to say, I began. Firstly, however, I believe it is important that I formally introduce myself beyond being merely the resident of Unit 7B and the owner of the canine Bodhi. I paused for effect. My name is Anya Sharma, and for the past 12 years, I have served as lead counsel for the National Office of Animal Rights and Welfare, NORW. My office, NORW, is one of the primary leading nonprofit legal advocacy organizations in this country. We are responsible for drafting, advocating for, and providing expert legal consultation and testimony on federal and state legislation regarding all aspects of animal welfare and animal rights. This includes, most pertinently to tonight's proceedings, the complex and often misunderstood rights of individuals with disabilities who rely on service and therapy animals, particularly under the Federal Fair Housing Act, the Air Carrier Access Act, and the Americans with Disabilities Act. A stunned, almost breathless silence fell over the room. Ms. Hayes's smug, triumphant smirk vanished, as if wiped away by an invisible hand, replaced by a look of utter slack-jawed disbelief, then dawning, horrified comprehension. Her face, which had been flushed with vindictive pleasure, began to pale visibly. The other board members straightened abruptly in their chairs, their expressions shifting rapidly from mild, dutiful concern to acute, almost palpable attention. Mr. Henderson's eyes widened, and he swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. Even the curious onlookers in the gallery seemed to lean forward, a collective intake of breath, audible in the sudden, profound stillness. The power dynamic in the room had just undergone a seismic, irreversible shift. The numerous baseless allegations brought forth by Ms. Hayes against my certified therapy animal, Bodhi. I continued, my voice now, like ice sharp and cutting, are not only demonstrably unequivocally false, but they also appear to be part of a deliberate, malicious, and actionable pattern of targeted harassment. Bodie is not, as Ms. Hayes so contemptuously refers to him, just a pet. He is a registered and extensively certified therapy animal with years of specialized training and voluminous documentation, all of which I have brought with me this evening. I placed a thick, meticulously organized legal binder on the table in front of me with a firm, decisive thud. His presence is medically necessary for me to manage a diagnosed documented disability, post-traumatic stress disorder with co-occurring panic disorder, a right that is robustly, unequivocally protected under federal and state fair housing laws. I then proceeded with calm surgical precision to systematically, ruthlessly dismantle each and every one of Ms. Hayes' flimsy, fabricated claims. I presented Bodie's official training certificates from a nationally accredited institution, his veterinary records attesting to his exceptionally calm, gentle temperament and perfect health, and a stack of signed, notarized affidavits from numerous other Willow Creek residents, including most damningly for Ms. Hayes, Mrs. Henderson herself, testifying to Bodie's gentle, predictable nature and directly refuting Ms. Hayes' specific, slanderous accusations of aggression. I even produced time-stamped photographs and short video clips from my own phone, clearly showing Bodie calmly by my side, or resting peacefully in our apartment during the exact times Ms. Hayes claimed he was terrorizing her friend's cat, or wantonly digging up the community rose garden. The photographic evidence Ms. Hayes had presented was shown to be either deliberately misleading, taken from angles that distorted perspective, or entirely irrelevant, showing Bodie simply walking on a path near a flower bed not in it. Regarding Ms. Hayes' deeply inappropriate, discriminatory, and frankly defamatory comments about my unstable emotional state and my public displays of distress, I said, my gaze fixing on her now pale, trembling form, attempting to leverage a resident's known or perceived medical condition to justify discriminatory action against their prescribed assistance animal is not only profoundly unethical and morally reprehensible, but it is also potentially illegal. It strongly suggests a profound misunderstanding of, or more worrisomely, a willful and malicious disregard for fundamental disability rights and fair housing laws. I then pivoted, addressing the entire HOA board, and by extension, the Willow Creek Condominium Association itself, outlining their potential and very significant legal liability. The Willow Creek Condominium Association, as a housing provider under the Fair Housing Act, has a clear, unambiguous legal obligation to provide reasonable accommodation for residents with disabilities. This includes, without question, allowing prescribed certified therapy animals, such as Bodie. Creating a hostile living environment or allowing a board member acting under the color of HOA authority to create such an environment through persistent harassment and false accusations, and then pursuing punitive discriminatory action based on those false or prejudiced claims, exposes this HOA and potentially its board members individually to significant legal and financial risks. These risks include, but are not limited to, substantial compensatory and punitive damages in a civil lawsuit, hefty fines imposed by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and potentially a federal investigation into systemic discriminatory practices. By the time I finished my presentation, the atmosphere in the room was electric, charged with a mixture of shock anger and dawning comprehension. Ms. Hayes was ashen-faced, utterly silent, her earlier confidence completely shattered. She looked small, shrunken, and profoundly defeated. Other residents in the gallery began to murmur amongst themselves, some casting openly hostile, angry glances at her. One resident, a young man I vaguely recognized, stood up. "I'd just like to say something for the record," he announced, his voice firm. "Ms. Hayes has been a divisive, bullying presence in this community for years. She tried to get my son's small plastic basketball hoop removed from our own driveway, claiming it violated some non-existent aesthetic code. She threatened us with fines." Another resident, an older woman, chimed in about a protracted, bitter dispute Ms. Hayes had initiated over the color of her patio umbrella. The floodgates of long-suppressed resentment against Ms. Hayes' petty tyrannies had finally spectacularly opened. Ms. Hayes, however, was not entirely vanquished. Stirred by the public attacks, a flicker of her old arrogance returned. This is a personal attack," she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. "She's using her position to to intimidate us. This lawyer, she's clearly biased. She probably faked all that paperwork for her therapy dog. She then produced another smaller folder. I have more evidence. A video. It shows her dog acting aggressively near the children's play area last month. I just obtained it. She fumbled with a small USB drive trying to hand it to Mr. Henderson. I held up my hand. Mr. Henderson, before you entertain yet another piece of Ms. Hayes' evidence, I would respectfully request that any digital media be submitted to an independent forensic analyst. My organization, NORW, routinely deals with falsified or misleadingly edited video evidence in cases of animal cruelty or housing discrimination. We can recommend several certified experts. Furthermore, I added my voice hardening, making false accusations against a legal professional, particularly one with my specific expertise in this area of law, carries its own set of serious repercussions, Ms. Hayes. It's called defamation, and filing a false report to an HOA board in an attempt to deprive a resident of their federally protected rights could also be construed as a form of witness tampering or obstruction. Ms. Hayes wilted. The fight seemed to drain out of her completely. She sank back into her chair, the USB drive falling from her trembling fingers. The HOA board, looking utterly shell-shocked, immediately went into an emergency closed session. When they emerged nearly an hour later, Mr. Henderson, the president, looked grim, exhausted, but also strangely resolute, as if a great weight had been lifted. Ms. Sharma, he announced, his voice carrying a new note of respect, the board has unanimously voted to dismiss all complaints against you and Bodhi forthwith. Furthermore, we will be issuing a formal public apology to you for the egregious distress and harassment this unfortunate situation has caused. Effective immediately, Ms. Evelyn Hayes has been asked to resign from her position as secretary and from all committee duties, pending a full independent review of her conduct and her previous handling of resident complaints. He paused, then added a touch of desperation in his voice. And we, the board, would be immensely grateful, Ms. Sharma, if your esteemed organization, NORWW, might be willing to provide some pro bono guidance or perhaps some formal training to our board and management on how to properly understand and fully comply with the complex federal and state laws regarding assistance animals and fair housing. Clearly, we have much to learn. Ms. Hayes, defeated and humiliated, did not wait for the review. She submitted her resignation from the board the very next day. Faced with the open hostility of many residents and the very real threat of further legal action from NOR, if any further harassment occurred, she became a virtual recluse within Willow Creek. Within 3 months, she quietly sold her condominium at a slight loss, I later heard, and moved to an undisclosed location. Good riddance. In the weeks and months that followed, the changes within Willow Creek were swift and significant. The HOA board, under new, more enlightened, and considerably more cautious leadership, eagerly accepted NORW's offer of pro bono training and policy consultation. We helped them completely redraft their outdated and often discriminatory pet policies to be fully compliant with state and federal law, transforming Willow Creek from a source of frustration into a potential model for other HOAs in the region. They even installed new, clearly marked and well-maintained pet relief areas throughout the common grounds, complete with biodegradable waste bags and disposal stations. Signs welcoming well-behaved leashed animals in most common areas replaced the old, vaguely threatening, "No pets allowed on grass" notices. The story of Anya Bodhi and the bully board member, as it became known within Willow Creek and then through whispers and online community forums and neighboring HOAs, became something of a local legend, a cautionary tale. But more importantly, it sparked a much broader, more constructive conversation. Using the Willow Creek incident as a carefully anonymized case study with the HOA's full permission and cooperation, NOARW launched a statewide awareness campaign. We developed and distributed model policies, educational brochures, and online training modules for housing associations, property management companies, and residents across the state, clarifying the rights and responsibilities of all parties concerning therapy animals, service animals, and emotional support animals in housing situations. The positive ripple effect, measured in reduced complaints to HUD and fewer desperate calls to our hotline, was tangible, deeply gratifying. Bodhi, of course, remained his calm, loving, imperturbable self, through it all basking in the extra pats, admiring glances, and occasional smuggled treats he now received on his daily walks. He seemed to enjoy his newfound status as a local canine celebrity. For me, The experience, though initially terrifying and deeply triggering, was ultimately profoundly empowering. It forced me to confront not just an external antagonist, but also my own internal fears, my own anxieties. And it reinforced, with a renewed, passionate conviction, the profound importance, the absolute necessity of the work I did every single day. The community rose garden once again became my sanctuary, but now, when I sat there on that familiar bench, with Bodhi resting peacefully by my side, the peace I felt was deeper, more resilient, more hard-won. It was a peace forged in the crucible of adversity and affirmed by the quiet, unshakable strength of justice served, not just for me and my wonderful life-saving dog, but for countless other individuals and their animal companions who might otherwise have suffered in silence, misunderstood, and unjustly persecuted. The community of Willow Creek, too, found a new, more authentic cohesion, one built on understanding empathy and mutual respect, rather than the arbitrary, often fearful enforcement of ill-conceived and discriminatory rules. And Bodhi, my gentle furry hero, just wagged his magnificent plumed tail, happy to be by my side, a steadfast, four-legged embodiment of unconditional love, unwavering loyalty, and the quiet, unassuming, but ultimately triumphant power of good.